Hey everyone, and welcome to part 3 in this series of getting this 2006 Screaming Eagle FatBoy back on the road after sitting a couple of years. In our last episode, we went through the entire fuel tank, disassembling it to remove the fuel pump, conducting an internal inspection, flushing it with gas to remove any debris, closing everything back up, and resealing it. Also finding 2 more LED bars to remove. The idle air valve was then removed for inspection, which required removing the throttle cables for access. Both the valve and throttle body were really nasty, requiring cleaning. Hoping this would solve the idle issue, everything was then reassembled, followed by the reinstallation of the throttle cables, the air filter mount, and all the pieces and parts. After this, the new spark plugs were gapped to 40 thousandths and installed into the engine. Surrounding aluminum cleaned up and cables reconnected. The final project of the chapter was the rear brakes, which were almost non-existent. This required the disassembly of the slip-on exhaust due to clearance issues. Brake pad incompatibilities complicated this project, but we got through it, which brings us to this chapter. Everything here is real nasty from the work, so I'm going to clean everything up right quick and then continue with the rear brake flush. I've cleaned up the mess that I made and we're ready to flush the brakes. So I'll remove this dust cap, and with the paper towel I've removed the remaining brake fluid and cleaned out the bottom of the reservoir. Now I'm going to add some fresh fluid all the way to the top. And I'll set up at the box side of a 3/8 on the bleeder. Once that's situated, I'll put my hose over it, start up my vacuum, and then open the bleeder. All the old fluid starts flowing through, draining out of the reservoir as it happens. I've got the bottle of fresh brake fluid in my hand, so as it gets low enough, I'll stop, add more fluid, all the way to the top, and then continue. Once finished, I'll pump it a couple times, remove any residual air bubbles from the front here, make sure everything feels good, and it does. Fill it to the final correct level. Take the cap and gasket, which I've cleaned, and place it back on the reservoir. 2 screws go back in, and those are just snugged back down because it's a rubber gasket. I'll take off the bleeder with the vacuum running to pull back any residual fluid into the bottle. Clean up the bleeder, and pop the dust cap on. Looking back to part 1, this is what we started with. Rear brakes are looking absolutely perfect now, and that concludes the work on the rear brakes. I make my way to the front brake and do the very same thing. Not great, but not terrible. You really can't tell in this reservoir. Now, this one had some sort of obstruction in the bleeder valve. It was blocked, and that was not really a problem. All I did was leave it open and pumped the handle a couple times to push whatever was blocking through, and then I closed it and resumed my normal process of bleeding. At that point, it worked just fine. Again, cleaned and capped, no issues bleeding the front or rear brakes on this bike. The new fluid looks as good as the old fluid in this reservoir, so I cap it off, and that's going to conclude our brake work on this bike. Just want to clean up my mess. Pump the brakes, make sure they feel good, and they do. And I'm going to wash this bike in the garage once all the bleeding is done. Not on camera, just hit it with the hose. But this is good. Ready to put the exhaust system back on, I'm going to hit these mating surfaces with anti-seize to make sure the next person who takes it off doesn't have the same problems that I had. I'm going to put the remnants, what's on the brush, on the inner portion of the exhaust. And then I'll just slide the pipe right back on till all the holes line up. Which is not as easy as it sounds, but it is a lot easier to put this back on than it was to take it off. The bracket bolts will receive a small amount of anti-seize, and again I will screw them all the way in, and then I'm going to turn it out slightly and then back in. The clamp bolt is still in good condition, it just needs some anti-seize. So after applying it, I start assembling everything together. And using both ratchets, I torque down the clamp. followed by these two mounting bolts, and that completes the mounting of the exhaust system. I've set the bleeder back up because I'm not done yet. This bike has a hydraulic clutch. So using a quarter box end, I'll set everything up just like I did for the brakes. Open up the clutch reservoir. And this fluid looks to be in the same condition as the brake fluid did. This bleeder is a lot smaller, so it does take a bit longer to do the job. Also, not knowing how big the slave cylinder is, I just run a couple cycles through, which I've sped up here so you can see it drain. Pull through about 3 reservoirs of oil, and I close it off. Drop the hose, top it off, recap it, and lock it down. Same procedure. Clean up the bleeder valve, and that's it. I'm done bleeding this bike. And this container was clean before I started. This is what all that .4 looked like that was pulled through. Not just the reservoirs, but also the lines and the cylinders. As I clean up the reservoir and the clutch, I go to depress the clutch, but I don't know if it feels right because I got no reference to compare it to. Is it actually working? I can't see anything happening like a mechanical clutch. So I'll jack up the bike and check for function at the rear wheel. Just about 1/4 inch or so off the stand. It's in neutral right now. We can see I could spin that rear tire, no trouble at all. So I'll rotate the tire as I lock it into first gear. We see it's now engaged in first. I'll pull in the clutch now. I cannot rotate the tire even with the clutch pulled in, even trying to pump it up. So I'll try and pump it up some more. And I spent about 5 minutes doing this, but it's obvious that pumping up the clutch is having no effect. What I need to do is physically examine the clutch to rule out the hydraulics I just worked on. So I'm going to take off this side cover on the primary. This is using a T27. The bike is wet because I just did wash everything down with a hose, under which there is a gasket, which I will carefully pry off because I want to reuse it. And now we have exposure to the pressure plate. And as I depress the clutch, we see that the deflection is absolutely fine, so there's no problem with the hydraulics or the bleeding. I think the bike has been sitting so long that all the plates are stuck together, so we're going to have to unfreeze them a bit. I have a dry clutch, I usually don't deal with this, but I'm gently rocking the wheel in first gear to loosen it up, and we could see that after about 10 seconds, it's getting easier and easier to rotate it in gear with the clutch depressed. I do have a cable tie holding in the clutch handle at this time. The rest will loosen up when the engine's running. So I'm temporarily going to put the seal back on because I'm going to be taking it off shortly. As well as the cover. I'm just putting it on so nothing gets in there. I'm not going to be torquing anything down. I just realized I put the cover on sideways. Even though it's temporary, it would bother me. So I actually took it off to straighten it out. I want to take a minute to clean everything up here. A lot of this metal won't be accessible anymore once I start going ahead and putting stuff back together. Using the Moz in combination with the cleaning spray makes quick work of this chrome. The melted boot marks come right out of the other side, and things are looking real good. I even got the top of the rocker boxes. Even though they're not going to be visible, they're not going to be accessible once the tank goes back on. Low side shined up nice too. Everything is looking good except for the aftermarket horn, which is made of plastic chrome. Did the best that I could. I did find a missing bolt while cleaning. That's not good. Identified from the parts catalog as an acorn stud, $78.99 alpha. Cheapest one I've seen is $12 plus $15 shipping. That's nuts. So since there's 2 of them in this bracket, I'm pulling out the other one with a 1/2-inch socket. And I'm going to be doing this for a number of reasons. We can see as we remove it, it's just a stud assembled into an acorn nut. The first thing I want to do is make sure the threads are still good on the bottom hole, so I will install it. Yeah, that'll hold just fine. So now I'm going to go and remove it, and we're going to size it up. And I think I found the size. We'll take a look, and it is 5/16 18. Lily took me to Ace to get the parts. First we found the chrome acorn 5/16 18 for $5. Followed by 5/16 18 1 1/4 for 55 cents. We spent $5.60. Let's bring it home. So I need to fasten the stud and the nut together like this. I rarely ever use red Loctite. Last time I used it was putting a new stud into the shovel head's case, but today is the day, and I'm going to cover these threads completely as I turn it into the nut, because I'm never removing these two pieces, ever. Turn it in and out a couple of times for even distribution, and then seat it all the way in. Lock it up in a vise, and then torque it all the way down. Then I'll clean up all the excess red Loctite that's on the threads. We're getting closer. A measurement is then taken of the original stud, 9.3 millimeter, which is then transcribed onto the new one. The original stud is then reinstalled back into position because I don't need it anymore and I don't want to lose it. So I'll chalk the new one in the vise again, then I'll cut it to size, and the measurement turned out good. I'll then apply blue Loctite to the first and only custom part on this bike that I fabricated and install it in position. There is no way to distinguish this $5 part from the $20 part or $30 part that I could have gotten from Harley Davidson, completing this small but satisfying portion of the project. Everything holds well now, there's no rattle, and feeling in the back, everything comes up flush, there are no clearance issues. We can now move on to oil changes. I've picked up a whole kit as we're changing all 3 oils. Here's our chrome oil filter, 4 quarts of fully synthetic 20W50, 1 quart of primary oil, and 1 quart of transmission oil. That's it. Starting with the engine oil, we're going to remove the filler cap to allow for air to get in, and my jack is interfering with the oil drain, so I'm going to remove it now. I also want the bike to be level, and I probably won't be needing the jack further for the rest of this project. The oil pan drain is right over here, which is surprisingly convenient. Using a 5/8 socket, I'll start loosening that bolt now. And I actually didn't make a mess, which is surprising if you've seen some of my other oil changing videos. Speeding this up so you don't have to watch oil drain, you'll notice it's not a lot, but it was actually empty if you remember in the first video, only adding a little bit of oil to the engine. So we're not going to sweat it right now, we're going to move on and have a look at the bottom of the oil plug to see how much of this is metal and how much is sludge. But with a very light application of brake cleaner, I could see that this is all sludge, and I'm actually not seeing any metal, if any very little metal, on this plug. Our kit comes with new O-rings, so this O-ring will not be reused. While the engine oil is draining, I'll be using a 3/8 hex to open the filler cap for the transmission, and I'll place it safely out of the way. Looking under the bike, between the 2 shocks on the forward side of the transmission, we see this bolt right here, same exact size bolt as our last oil drain. And I'm about to mess up really bad because there's something about me and emptying transmissions. I'm breaking the tension of the bolt with the deep well socket and getting my pan ready, not realizing, however, that that bolt is going to fall right through that deep well because I should be using a hex key after I've broken tension. And when that bolt falls into the deep well, that oil just goes everywhere. Knocked that pan onto the floor and took like 3 seconds to get it situated again, but by then most of the oil had drained and left a mess all over the jack and the floor. It's typical. So now I'll pull the bolt from the deep well socket and we'll have a look, and we definitely got some metal on there. I wipe the sludge onto my finger, and as I slowly bring my finger close, you can see those little fibrous hairs make their way back onto the magnet. Yep, metal. But it wasn't like chunks of metal, so I wasn't majorly concerned, so I cleaned this up. I'll clean it up further as we make our way to the primary drain right over here by the kickstand. And with a 3/16 hex, I'll be loosening that plug. Once I get it loose, I'll bring this container under it, make sure I don't make a mess a second time today. Yeah, I'm going to say that execution wasn't bad. 2 out of 3 for me, very uncharacteristic for draining oil. We got all 3 dripping now. And this plug has extremely fine fibrous metal powder, nothing to be concerned about. All clean with 0 focus. I'll let this drip and move on to the oil filter. Only beaten by the V-Star 1100 as the most obnoxious oil filter placement, I needed to purchase a special funnel as to not make a mess all over this motorcycle when I remove the filter. Amazing. And we'll now go through all my oil filter wrenches that aren't going to fit around this filter because there's just no clearance because not only is the filter in a bad spot, but we can see that this position sensor is seated right here and in the way of everything. And there's a special tool from Harley for this that has a cutout for the crank sensor. I'll just pick one up, but what I want to do is see if I could just print out one for the given dimension, which is 74.5 millimeters. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If we have a look inside the box for the oil filter, we'll see a package of 3 O-rings. They're supposed to go on the 3 plugs we removed. It'll definitely fit on 2 of them. Using a pick, I'll pry the old O-ring off. I've cleaned it up again. Notice the hex fitting on the bottom would have been real helpful for the transmission as to not make a complete mess of my work area. Now I'll install the new O-ring, just placing it down all the way to the base. And with a 1/4-inch Allen key, I'll install the plug. This is how I actually should have removed it. Squeezing a towel up high enough between those 2 shocks just to clean around that oil port. Inserting the oil plug with the Allen key, I'll screw it all the way in, finger tight. Now I could switch over to the socket and torque wrench if so desired to torque down the bolt to the final setting. Remember, it doesn't take much torque. If you're using a torque wrench, it's between 14 and 21 foot-pounds. That's it. Wipe down any residual mess that I've made and inspect everything, and that should be it for the emptying of the transmission oil. I have my bottle of ADW90 that came with my fluid change kit. And I'm just doing a quick clean around the oil filler before I get started so I don't knock any sand or whatnot into there. And I set in my clean funnel. Keeping in mind what happens next is happening with a level bike, not on the kickstand. And my intent is not to dump in the entire bottle because I know that there's residual oil in there. I'm going for about 75 to 80% of this bottle. There's no viewport on the side of the bottle, so I'm kind of guesstimating. I'm going to stop here and put this off to the side. Pull the funnel and then drop in the clean cap dipstick combo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw this in just until the rubber touches. I'm not going to torque it down at all to get a proper measurement. Quickly unscrew it and take a reading. When I removed it, it was clear that I overshot it. It should definitely not be over full. A reminder that it is easier to add fluid than it is to remove it. My vacuum system that I use for brake bleeding makes this somewhat of a painless process. After removing some fluid and remeasuring a couple times, we see that we nailed it right at the fill mark. So the filler cap will now be closed for its final time, seating it fully this time. You can see the way they designed everything here is just absolutely awesome. I just wanted to point that out. And we're done with the transmission, moving on. The primary has been draining for quite a while now. I'll clean around the drain hole and reinstall the drain plug. This will be torqued to between 36 and 60 inch-pounds. Wipe up my mess, and we're good. I removed this previously with a T27 to inspect the clutch, so they should come out easily. Making sure I do the top bolt last because of gravity and stuff. Then I'll carefully peel off the gasket. And I don't have the special funnel that goes on here either, but I don't really need it, and I don't do this all the time. I have a small enough funnel that'll go in the side, stick it just like that. And this is going to be the primary oil. And the instructions say go to the beginning of the bottom of the diaphragm spring. And the supplied picture is ridiculous. And you can't actually see the bottom of the spring from here, but there is a purple marking on the spring that helps you see it, provided it's facing all the way down. Mine's to the side so we could see it in this picture right here. There's that spring. And it should just be visible, the oil line, from down here as we view it. Put in my small funnel that actually fits in here and slowly add oil, but I'm not going to add the entire container because obviously there's oil in this primary. I'm going to add about 3/4 of this container, and I'm going to evaluate. Now, I could see the level come to the bottom of the spring with a flashlight, but what I could also do is jack it up slightly, spin the rear wheel, and we could see how much of that spring actually gets wet as it spins around. It would give us some sort of indication as to how high the level is. You'd want just the end of the spring to start to get wet. You would think since the level is so critical, they would just put a fill line in the other inspection cover, but why make things simple? From this angle with the light on, we could see the oil just barely visible down there, just at the bottom of that spring. So now I'll wipe up the mating surfaces, and observing the towards clutch indication, I'll line these two up so I can place them back on with the top screw. putting in the other 4 screws and ensuring that the gasket remains lined up so it's not damaged. And with a 100 inch-pound torque wrench, they're finished off in the star pattern. The print shape was correct, but it wasn't able to fit over the sensor. But the correct one for this application has arrived, so we're going to throw it on and see if it fits. And we have that cut out right there for the sensor. I'm going to push it on, no problem at all. And remove this, because now I get to put this funnel back into position without the filter wrench. So I could take a big ass nail and beat it into a Harley Davidson with a hammer. I swear I've never done anything like this before on a motorcycle. Only a Harley. The purpose of this will become obvious in a moment, but I need to put that wrench back on and rotate it 180 degrees so that the hole that I just made is on the bottom. It begs the question, maybe I should put a hole on the bottom to start with, but here we are. So I'm going to rotate. It feels like this was put on with like a breaker bar or a pneumatic tool. I don't know what whoever was thinking when they installed this oil filter, but I got it loose and I'm going to turn it now. It's getting easier, obviously, and we'll see where we're at as I put this piece back down. Moving a lot of pieces around. It's just I didn't even get it to 180 degrees. And I did go back and rotate it further. And we can see that basically what we're doing is pre-emptying the oil filter to make a smaller mess. And I've strategically placed this dish on the floor to catch everything. Incredible. But the filter finally drained, so we're going to loosen it the rest of the way now. And the goal is that this funnel will catch all the remaining oil and it won't get all over the bike. It's just all right here. So I'll pop off the ratchet and remove the filter, all the while I'm holding that funnel in position. And I guess it worked. So I'll wipe it down quick so it doesn't make a mess as I carry it over to my pan. Yeah, it didn't entirely work. But it didn't entirely not work. It was just a few drops here that I cleaned up really quick. So I'll put a piece of paper towel here and wait for this to complete draining before I continue. During that time, I'll swap out this O-ring with one of the supplied O-rings from the kit. Clean up the last drips of oil from around the hole. And reinsert the plug. This one I don't need the hex key to reinsert because I could hold the plug while I screw it in. Just screwing it in finger tight. At which point I'll tighten it down a full seat of 14 to 21 foot-pounds. I come back now and remove that paper towel. Nothing more is coming out of here. Then checking and cleaning the mating surface, making sure there's no grime or sand or whatnot on there. And that means it's now time to pull that new filter out of the box. We can see this one actually has a better fitting to loosen and tighten the filter. Fresh oil is applied to the gasket. And I'll just screw it on finger tight as far as I can go, which is pretty much going to be full seat. Definitely can't over tighten it in this method. Then with the ratchet and socket, I'll give it 3/4 to 1 full turn. Now we'll take the supplied thermostat tank plug here and toss it in the garbage. Replace it with a clean funnel. And using our supplied 4 quarts of oil, we're going to add 1, 2, followed by 1/2 quart of oil. And that's going to be it for now. We have a new cap. This one actually seals. It also has a thermometer on it, and it's not broken, so we'll install it now. And we will revisit the oil level on this bike when we start heating it up and it's off the jack. But aside from the engine oil top-off, we're finished with all 3 oils on this bike. And that concludes part 3 in this series of troubleshooting, repairing, and putting the CVO2 back on the road after a couple of years. I hope you found this video enjoyable, entertaining, and informative. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below, helps me out a lot when you do, and hit that subscribe button to get more videos like this when they come out. When the next video comes out in the series, a link will be posted in the top right corner. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?